first, I wanted to say thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak. Um, in this talk, I'm going to walk through Augur v2, and then also in the second half of the talk, we're going to go through composability and essentially the sort of concept of like how Augur uses all these different things in the Ethereum ecosystem. I think it's a really good case study for all the different ways you can interact with other projects and protocols in the Ethereum space. So the whole kind of inception behind Augur, the concept behind it, is that if you imagine like smart contracts in Ethereum in general, the way I view it is sort of similar to the printing press. What the printing press did for information, Ethereum and smart contracts are going to do for finance. So just as how before the printing press came out, if you wanted to disseminate information or publish a book, it was very difficult. You'd have to have monks or scribes, write things down manually by hand. It took a very long period of time. That's sort of how financial markets work today. If you want to create a new financial market, it's a huge overhead, huge headache, and huge amount of work to actually do it. And so I view Ethereum as sort of like the printing press of finance. And if you think about financial markets, there's a lot of different things you can do with them. But one of the main things you can do is you can have synthetic markets, or markets that are essentially derivatives. So you're not trading the underlying asset, but you're basically betting on some aspect of the underlying asset. And that's sort of the whole vision behind Augur, is to provide universal access to tools that allow you to increase and protect wealth through finance and betting. So the idea is that something like a future on, say, corn isn't just a mindless bet. It allows a farmer to hedge risk. And with Augur, you can hedge risk on a ton of different things, all the way from something that's just purely recreational, like betting on a sporting event, to if you have a bunch of exposure to a certain person becoming president and you want to hedge that risk, you could basically bet on them on a prediction market. And you can do this for lots of other events as well. It's not just politics and sports. Any sort of real world event, prediction markets let you create contracts to speculate on them with. And so the way we're going to do that with Augur is create the world's most accessible, no-limit betting platform. So if you think of something like Bitcoin or Ethereum, it's basically no limits, allows you to do transactions globally, and it allows you to do them at pretty low fees. And so the whole idea behind Augur is, what if you had this for things like betting as well and derivatives? And the reason they're called prediction markets is it's just a really simple concept. The idea is that the price is a prediction of what's going to happen. So you can think of the stock market as a fancy prediction market for like what's going to happen with companies. But you can also have ones on very specific events, like will Russia invade Estonia within the next 5 years, who will win a certain presidential election, or all the way to things like weather, like how much rainfall a certain area will see, whether there'll be a drought, whether there'll be a flood, things like that. This is a really popular one. This is a screenshot of InTrade in the election with Mitt Romney and Barack Obama. And one of the more popular use cases historically has been political prediction markets. But as I was saying earlier, there's a huge range of use cases that you can use them for. So everything from hedging on various risks to insurance to bug bounties, whether a certain platform will get hacked or not. You can use them to forecast like trends. You can use them to bet essentially on anything you can think of. And so the concept behind a decentralized one is there's no central point of failure. So there's no one person who holds all the funds or who processes the trades or who does really anything. But the three key features that are differentiated from the user standpoint are fees are very low. So centralized prediction markets have very high fees, think 5 to 10%, or in the case of Betfair, in some cases, if you're a market maker there, the fees go upwards of 50% of your profits go to them. The next one is limits. This is a more popular thing in sports betting. If you start winning, you'll get limited. So one day you might find that you can bet 10,000. The next day you may find that you can bet 10, like literally $10. Your limit got cut by a huge factor of like 1,000. And so in a decentralized system, you don't have like some central arbiter who's going to say, oh, this person's a winning bettor, so we're going to kick them out. And then the last piece is it's global. So if you think of most betting platforms, they're kind of localized to one geography. The best analogy I have for this is if you think of payment processors. Prior to Bitcoin, payments was pretty geographic specific. If you wanted to send money from one person to somebody else across the globe, it was very, very expensive and difficult to do it. You would use something like Western Union or MoneyGram. Bitcoin still hasn't fully solved that problem yet, but it's on its way. I think 10, 20 years from now, if you think about remittances, I don't think Western Union is going to be charging 8% anymore. I think those fees are going to compress a lot. And I think we'll see the same thing with betting and prediction markets. The fees are going to go way down. They're going to look much more like financial markets as opposed to these markets where you're kind of betting against the house and you pay the house 5 to 10% of your winnings. So there's really three things you can do. You can create markets, you can trade in them, and then there's the concept of like how you pay the market out, which I'm not going to get into in this talk because it would kind of take too long. But this is the UI for Augur version 2. So it looks like a trading site, and we'll kind of get to that in a minute, why it looks like a trading site and some other stuff we're working on. But you can basically sort by category. If you click on a market, it tells you the probability of each outcome. So in this first example, there's a market on SpaceX. Will they complete a flight to the International Space Station? And in this example market, the probability is 35% yes. And so the concept is if you bought that at 35% and it went to $1, you would make just under 3x your money with that bet. With Augur, it's much easier to sign up. You can sign up with email or Gmail or a phone number. That's sort of like if you're doing a low dollar volume amount to sort of get started. Obviously, you wouldn't want to put $100,000 in an account secured by your email, and so that's why you can use things like a hardware wallet for something like that. But for the first user who wants to start off with like $100 just to see what it's like, the UX barriers of a fully decentralized login solution sort of outweigh the benefits, and so that's something that we're kind of toying with the launch of V2. You'll be able to, through the wallet partners, you'll be able to deposit with a debit card to get DAI. It's another big change is bets are taking place in DAI instead of Ether, which is a big complaint by kind of traditional bettors in V1. Is that if you're using ETH, it's super volatile. So if you're betting $100 and the bet you're betting is at 90%, so you win a little bit around $10 if you're right. Well, if the price of ETH goes down 20%, you lost money on that bet. So people want DAI to kind of basically not have the volatility risk. And this is sort of what the launch UI looks like. We've since changed the colors a bit, but the idea is you have the outcomes you can bet on, you have an order book, you have candlestick charts. It's really like a regular trading UI. If you use something like Coinbase Pro, it's very similar. You enter the quantity, price, and it will tell you how much you're going to bet. It'll also tell you, once it's filled in, it'll tell you how much you could potentially win, how much you could potentially lose. And then if you place an order, if there's an order already on the book, you'll fill that order. If not, your order is placed as an open order on the order book, just like trading any other cryptocurrency, except this time you're trading on the outcomes of real world events. But prediction markets don't just have to have a trading UI. They have historically, but you could also use other UIs. Betfair is essentially a prediction market, and their UI looks drastically different. In this UI, the numbers like 8.5 means you'll win $8.5 for every dollar you bet if that outcome happens. This is an example of Betfair's exchange UI. So the blue side is if you want to back something, the pink side is if you want to lay it or bet against something. And it tells you, the dollar amount that's available to place a bet at a certain price. This is another example of a betting UI. It's Pinnacle. These are showing American odds. So the thing with betting is there's a lot of different ways to view the same interface. And if you talk to users, people are very different in terms of what they understand. Like some people only understand trading UIs. Some people only understand betting in European or decimal odds. Some people only understand fractional British odds. Some people only understand American odds. There's a lot of different ways to express the same information, and people are pretty dogmatic about their way. People kind of tend to think in a certain way for how they want to place a bet. And so you can make the odds toggleable so you can show them and view them differently. And so the main thesis behind Augur is for betting, we think betting's broken, has very high limits, very high fees, very low limits. There's a lot of restrictions. There's things like rollover requirements that mean if you bet $100, maybe you need to bet it 5 or 10 times before you can withdraw. Usually people lose most of their money by that point. So there's a lot of issues with betting as it exists today, and specifically around people who are betting large amounts, who are whales and who are people who make the market. If you're betting $100 on a soccer match, a few times a week, you're not going to run into these problems. If you're betting 100,000, you're going to run into all these problems. And so it's a market where the people who provide the liquidity really kind of get screwed over. The average person doesn't notice too much, but you could have a way more efficient market, and you could probably get a lot of those whales if you solve a lot of these problems. But there's some main barriers with blockchain tech that make it difficult even after Augur V2. Things like Ethereum needs to scale for quick sports betting to really take off. Because if you score a goal in a soccer match and you had a bet that was about to be placed, the odds are going to drastically change when that goal gets scored. And so you'll get adversely selected against. You're basically going to lose money on those bets because someone will take it after the odds have changed and when they haven't changed in your favor. And so having more scalable solutions is important. We've done some of that with V2, which I'll talk about in a moment. And so the other thing we're working on is we're working on a betting UI in parallel to the trading one. And the betting UI will launch later after V2. And V2 is currently slated for a June launch. We're done with feature work. We're just doing bug fixes and performance testing to make sure it's performant and actually works smoothly when it goes live. But there's no additional feature work happening. It's just kind of final nits and fixes before launch. Betting is something we're looking to launch later this year, probably closer towards the end of the year, or whenever sports actually start to happen again because of coronavirus. But the idea behind the betting UI is to launch it in conjunction with some sort of scalability solution. So you sort of solve all the problems that bettors have with Augur today, which are mostly things surrounding latency. And there's not a ton of time, so I'll skip these 2 slides. This is kind of just the vision behind Augur. Is initially we wanted to release a functional version that wasn't a good experience, and then iterate on the experience until it actually works smoothly. We're doing some of that with V2, and we're going to continue doing that with version 3 afterwards. But now I'm going to talk about composability for the rest of this talk. So Augur uses a lot of different projects in the Ethereum ecosystem. The first one is 0x. So when you're trading in Augur, you need to be able to do order placements and cancellations off-chain for free. Otherwise, it's way too expensive to market make, which is a big problem with version 1, is you couldn't really market make because it was just ludicrously expensive. Every order you had to place, you had to submit an on-chain transaction. If you wanted to modify the price or cancel it, it's another on-chain transaction. And so it's a lot of overhead. And 0x solves those problems for us. Next one is IPFS. Augur's pretty unique in that you see a lot of dApps that are kind of hosted through a regular website. Augur's actually stored on IPFS entirely. We publish the JavaScript code to GitHub. Usually within 24, 48 hours, somebody uploads it to IPFS and pins it there. And then it kind of spreads across all the IPFS.io and the Cloudflare IPFS and things like that. Where you can access it over the regular web. But it's pretty cool in that the Augur UI is hosted essentially entirely on IPFS, and actually with V2, a lot of the data is as well. So instead of pinging Ethereum nodes to get all the data about Augur, we actually store a big kind of pre-sorted bundle of it on IPFS. And there's a way that we do that in a trustless way, which is kind of complicated and took a lot of work to figure out. And that could probably be a talk in and of itself. But I think there's a lot of things you can do with IPFS that's sort of underexplored for storing data in a trustless way off-chain and not having to overload Ethereum nodes like Infura. Maidcry already explained DAI gives stability for the trades. It's really critical for Augur. I don't think we have any hope of mainstream adoption without a stablecoin like DAI. Because you just can't. Most bettors have a 1 to 2 to 3% edge, and so volatility will wipe you out if something is super volatile. Uniswap is an interesting one. So Augur requires the price of rep for doing transactions, or basically that's like a certain fee in Augur, and so it requires the price of rep. Now, the reason we can't just use the rep Oracle system to get this is it would require a market or require a source that's never going to change. So if you say, well, what's the price of rep according to CoinMarketCap? Well, CoinMarketCap could go down. It could theoretically go away. They may change the URL endpoint or whatever. So you need something that's on chain that you can get it kind of indefinitely into the future. And so we actually use Uniswap for that. It's we use the Uniswap price oracles for that. It's something we work pretty closely with the Uniswap team going back and forth about how to have a price oracle that over a long period of time is extremely expensive to manipulate. And I think they've done a really good job on that. It's actually one of the features I'm most excited about for Uniswap v2 is these time-based price oracles. We use Streetbox for comments. That's another thing that's built on top of IPFS. I haven't seen a ton of people talking about it, but it's really cool. It lets you basically have like traditional commenting systems with like upvotes and replies and stuff, all in a peer-to-peer fashion, which is really neat because it'd be great to have comments on Augur markets, but we don't want to host a commenting system, and there aren't actually any like peer-to-peer commenting systems outside of Streetbox. It's the only one that's out there. Last one is kind of wallets. A wide range of wallets. I think we'll see more and more dApps start to add different wallets and kind of layer them in different ways, depending on what sort of way the user wants to sign up. Whether it's like with a phone number or their Gmail or their just regular email, or if they happen to have MetaMask. That's something we've tried to like iterate on quite a bit to make it pretty smooth. Initially we just kind of had like a bunch of different options and you could kind of choose them and it didn't really tell the user what they were, which is kind of a pattern a lot of decentralized apps do. But now I think we've gotten it better. It could definitely improve even farther. But I think, login systems for dApps, even though you're not really logged in, you're bringing your own wallet, is something that could improve in this space. And I think a lot of these wallet onboarding solutions have done actually a really good job. Like Taurus and Fortmatic are super slick and smooth, and people kind of tend to say, well, they're not decentralized, but to get the first user in, with $50 or whatever, it doesn't need to be 100% decentralized. You can show them a bunch of other benefits of something like Augur before you then convert them to, if they're betting $100,000 or some crazy amount, then you can convert them to a hardware wallet. And the last one is Plasma and Rollups. So the idea is we needed some way to scale Augur. I borrowed this little graphic from optimism.io, which is one of the teams working on optimistic rollup. And I think that it's really important to have low latency transactions for betting, as I explained earlier. We're currently working with a few teams in these spaces. One of them the main one on the Plasma side is Matic. And then on optimistic rollup, there's Arbitrum who's trying to do some stuff. There's a few other people who are working on it. And I think one of these solutions is going to launch sometime by the end of this year with something on mainnet. And so that's something I'm super excited about because when I got into Ethereum in 2014, I thought it would scale a lot sooner than it did. But now it's finally happening, and I couldn't be more excited for that. And so with that, if you want to reach me or Augur or anything, I'm at Joey Krug on Twitter and at Augur Project on Twitter. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions or just want to give feedback or whatever it may be. Thank you.